The pristine neighborhood of Oakwood Heights gleamed like a magazine advertisement on the spring morning I moved in. Every lawn cut with military precision, every mailbox identical, every house painted in the same 5 approved earth tones. My new home sat on a gentle slope overlooking the community clubhouse and its Olympic-sized swimming pool, the crown jewel of the development. I pulled into the driveway of my colonial-style home and turned off the engine. The realtor had called it modestly elevated terrain, but what it meant in practical terms was that my property had excellent drainage. The previous owner had installed a professionally engineered drainage system that directed rainwater safely away from the foundation and toward a natural runoff area beyond my property line. The real estate agent had made sure to mention that the drainage system was fully permitted and approved by both the county and the homeowners association when it was installed 5 years ago. He had even provided copies of the permits in my closing documents. One less thing to worry about, he had assured me with a confident smile. My first week in the neighborhood was pleasant enough. Neighbors brought welcome baskets and introduced themselves with practiced smiles. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door warned me with a nervous laugh about the HOA being a bit particular, but assured me that they kept the neighborhood looking immaculate. Mr. Chen from across the street mentioned the board president by name. "Just stay on the good side of Karen Woodley and you will be fine," he said with a curious look I could not quite interpret. I received my first HOA welcome packet within days of moving in. It contained a 70-page rulebook with regulations on everything from approved mailbox designs to the maximum height of garden gnomes. The tone was stern, but I told myself that strict rules were the price of property values in a neighborhood this pristine. The spring weather turned rainy about 2 weeks after I moved in. The first major storm hit on a Tuesday evening, raindrops pelting against my windows as thunder rolled across the darkening sky. I watched with satisfaction as water flowed perfectly through the drainage channels and safely away from my foundation. The system worked flawlessly, carrying potentially damaging water away from both my property and those below me on the gentle slope. I noticed her the next morning. A woman in an immaculate pantsuit stood at my property line, staring intently at my drainage system with a frown that seemed permanently etched into her face. She made notes on a tablet, occasionally taking photos and shaking her head in apparent disapproval. Curious, I stepped outside and approached her with a friendly wave. "Good morning. Can I help you with something?" She turned to face me, her expression calculating and cold. "I am Karen Woodley, president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association." She did not offer her hand. "I see you have some unauthorized drainage modifications on your property." I explained that the drainage system had been installed by the previous owner and was fully permitted and approved by both the county and the HOA itself. Karen listened with thinly veiled impatience. "The appearance standards of our community have changed since then," she replied dismissively. "That drain is an eyesore. We will be in touch." She walked away without another word, her heels clicking on the sidewalk with military precision. 3 days later, an official-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. The HOA letterhead gleamed at the top of the page as I unfolded it at my kitchen table. The letter cited an unauthorized and aesthetically displeasing drainage modification that negatively impacts the visual harmony of the Oakwood Heights community. It demanded prompt remediation, but offered no specific timeline or consequences. I stared at the letter, confusion slowly giving way to concern. The storm clouds visible through my window seemed to mirror the trouble brewing in my seemingly perfect new community. The HOA violation letter sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days while I tried to make sense of it. The document was filled with vague language about community aesthetic standards and unauthorized modifications, but lacked specific citations from the HOA bylaws. The drainage system that they now found so offensive had been professionally installed, properly permitted, and functionally necessary given the slope of my property. I pulled out the extensive HOA rulebook I had received upon moving in and began methodically searching for any regulations regarding drainage systems. After 3 hours of reading dense bureaucratic language, I found only one relevant passage, stating that all external property modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. The drainage system predated my ownership and had been approved years ago. I dug through my closing documents and ND the permits and approvals for the drainage system, including an HOA approval letter signed by the previous board president. The county permits were also in order, showing that the system had been installed to code and inspected properly. Armed with these documents, I attended my first HOA meeting the following Tuesday evening. The community center meeting room was half filled with homeowners, most looking bored or resigned. At the front of the room, a long table seated the HOA board members, with Karen Woodley center stage, a stack of papers neatly arranged before her. When the meeting reached the open forum portion of the agenda, I approached the microphone set up in the aisle. "Good evening. My name is Alex Morgan from 1542 Oakwood Drive. I recently received a violation notice regarding my property drainage system. I have brought documentation showing that this system was properly permitted and approved by both the county and the previous HOA board." I held up the folder containing the permits. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the room. Karen looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. "Yes, Mr. Morgan, the board is aware of your situation," she said, not bothering to look at the documents I was offering. "The Architectural Review Committee has reassessed that drainage system and found it does not meet current community standards." "But it was already approved," I responded, confused. "I have the signed documentation right here." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Previous approvals can be revoked when they no longer align with community standards. Section 8.3 of the bylaws." I glanced around at the other board members, hoping for some sign of support or at least reasonableness. There were 4 of them flanking Karen. Mr. Peterson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, avoided my gaze. Mrs. Calloway, an elderly woman, nodded along with whatever Karen said. The other 2 men, whose names I did not yet know, stared blankly ahead as if I was not even in the room. "Can you please tell me which specific standard the drainage system violates?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "The vertical protrusion exceeds our current ground-level fixture guidelines," Karen replied without hesitation, though I noticed she did not reference any specific bylaw section. "The board has made its decision, Mr. Morgan. You will need to remove the drainage system." "But that system prevents water damage to both my property and those downhill," I explained, growing increasingly frustrated. "It was professionally engineered specifically for the topography of my lot." Karen leaned forward slightly. "This meeting has a full agenda, Mr. Morgan. Your 3 minutes are up. Please handle the violation or face appropriate penalties." As I returned to my seat, I noticed a few sympathetic glances from other homeowners, but no one spoke up in my defense. The meeting continued as if the matter was settled. After the meeting concluded, I gathered my documents and headed for the parking lot. The night air was cool as I walked toward my car, keys in hand. "Mr. Morgan." Karen Woodley stood between 2 parked cars, her silhouette backlit by a security light. She took several steps toward me, invading my personal space. "I do not appreciate having my authority questioned in public," she said, her voice low but intense. "Things can go very smoothly for homeowners who understand their place in this community, or they can become unnecessarily difficult." "I am just trying to follow the rules," I replied, taking an instinctive step backward. "The drainage system has all the proper approvals." "Let me be clear," Karen said, leaning even closer. "That drain will be removed. You would be wise not to fight this battle, Mr. Morgan. I have been managing this community for 15 years. People who resist compliance eventually regret it." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit parking lot. 5 days later, a certified letter arrived. This time, the language was specific and threatening. I had 30 days to remove the drainage system or face fines of $100 per day. The letter also mentioned the possibility of property liens if the fines remained unpaid. My hands trembled slightly as I set the letter down on my kitchen table. What had begun as a minor bureaucratic annoyance was quickly becoming a serious threat to my financial stability and my new home. The certified letter felt like a declaration of war. I needed advice from someone who understood the legal boundaries of HOA power. Fortunately, my college roommate Michael had become a real estate attorney. I called him the next morning and explained my situation. "HOAs have considerable power," Michael explained over the phone, "but they are not all-powerful. They have to follow their own bylaws and cannot enforce rules arbitrarily or selectively." He advised me to gather evidence of similar drainage systems in the neighborhood that were not being cited for violations. If I could prove selective enforcement, I might have leverage. "Document everything," Michael advised. "Every communication, every similar drainage system in the neighborhood, every relevant section of the bylaws, and check if there are any personal connections between board members and local contractors. Sometimes these harassment campaigns have financial motivations." I spent the next weekend walking through Oakwood Heights with my phone camera, documenting similar drainage features on other properties. I discovered 7 homes with drainage systems nearly identical to mine, yet none had violation notices posted. Some were even more visually prominent than my system. I was photographing one such drainage system when its owner, an older man named Frank Delgado, came outside to check what I was doing. After I explained my situation, his friendly expression darkened. "You bought the old Peterson place on the hill," he said, nodding in understanding. "Come inside for coffee. There are some things you should know about our HOA president." In Frank's kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air as rain began to patter against the windows. Frank spoke in a hushed tone despite us being alone in his house. "Karen has a history of targeting certain homeowners," he explained, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Last year, the Johnsons at 1367 were harassed about their approved solar panels until they eventually sold and moved. Before that, it was the Patels and their permitted fence extension. Karen always finds something to complain about if she decides she does not like you." "But why would she target me specifically?" I asked. "I just moved in." Frank shrugged. "Sometimes it is random, sometimes it is personal. Just be careful, document everything." The rain intensified outside, a spring storm rolling in without warning. Frank and I watched through his kitchen window as water began pooling in yards without proper drainage, while flowing smoothly through properties with systems like mine. "See that?" Frank pointed. "That is why these drainage systems were approved in the first place. The neighborhood is built on a gentle slope, and water management is essential. I thanked Frank for the coffee and information, then hurried home through the increasingly heavy downpour. By the time I reached my house, the storm had become fierce, wind driving the rain horizontally. From my living room window, I could see my drainage system efficiently channeling water away from my foundation and preventing any pooling or flooding. The next morning revealed the storm's impact. Several homes without proper drainage had soggy lawns and small areas of flooding. My property remained dry and undamaged, a testament to the effectiveness of the very system Karen wanted removed. Over the next week, 2 more violation notices arrived at my house. One cited unapproved landscaping, though I had not changed anything in the garden since moving in. Another claimed my garbage bins were visible from the street for more than the permitted time, though I had been careful to follow the schedule precisely. The pattern was becoming clear. I was being singled out for special attention. I decided to dig deeper into Karen Woodley and the HOA board. I requested copies of all HOA meeting minutes for the past 5 years, which reluctantly they had to provide as a matter of record. I spent a full weekend poring over the documents, searching for any patterns or conflicts of interest. The connection finally revealed itself in meeting minutes from 4 years ago. The neighborhood had conducted a bidding process for drainage work throughout the community. Bluecrest Pool and Landscape Co. had submitted the highest bid, but lost to a competitor. The minutes noted Karen's abstention from the vote due to a family business interest in Bluecrest. Further research confirmed that Bluecrest Pool and Landscape was owned by Karen's husband, Robert Woodley. The company had done all of the pool maintenance and landscaping work for the community's common areas for the past decade, despite their higher prices. I spread the documents across my dining table, connections forming in my mind. Lightning flashed outside my window as another storm approached, illuminating the web of relationships and potential conflicts of interest I had uncovered. The realization struck me with the force of the thunder that followed. This was not about drainage systems or community aesthetics. This was personal. I had unknowingly stepped into a years-old grudge match between Karen's family business and the previous homeowner who had chosen a different contractor for his drainage work. The fight had always been personal, and now I was caught in the crossfire of someone else's war. The daily violation notices began arriving like clockwork. Each morning brought a new envelope, a new complaint, and a new fine added to my growing debt to the HOA. The methodical harassment was clearly designed to break me down financially and emotionally. Monday, $100 fine for unapproved drainage system. Tuesday, $100 fine for the same violation. Wednesday, $100 fine again. By the end of the second week, I owed the HOA $1,400 in fines, despite filing formal appeals against each violation. My appeals disappeared into an administrative black hole, neither denied nor approved, simply ignored while the fines continued to accumulate. I sat at my kitchen table one evening, bills spread before me. My mortgage payment was due in 10 days. The property tax bill had arrived earlier than expected, and now this growing stack of HOA fines threatened my financial stability. I would have to delay some payments, damaging my credit score, or dip into my emergency savings much sooner than I had planned after the expense of buying a new home. The doorbell rang just as I was calculating how many months I could sustain this financial assault. Through the peephole, I saw Karen Woodley standing on my porch, another envelope in hand. I considered not answering, but decided it was better to face the situation directly. I opened the door. Karen looked up at me with what could only be described as satisfaction in her eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I wanted to personally deliver this notice since you seem to be ignoring our previous communications." She handed me the envelope. Unlike the others, this one was thicker, more official looking. I opened it on the spot, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of watching me retreat inside first. The document inside was a notice of intent to place a lien on my property for unpaid HOA fines and fees. "This is ridiculous," I said, looking up from the paper. "You know these violations are manufactured. I have documentation proving that my drainage system was approved and is identical to others in the neighborhood that are not being cited." Karen took a step forward, forcing me to either step back or have her uncomfortably close. I held my ground. "The difference, Mr. Morgan, is that those other systems were installed by approved contractors," she said quietly. "Your predecessor chose to ignore recommendations and hire an outside firm." "You mean he did not hire your husband's company?" I replied, watching her expression carefully. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before her mask of professional indignation returned. "My personal connections have nothing to do with HOA enforcement decisions. The board votes on all matters." "A board that has never once voted against your recommendations in 15 years, I countered. "I read all the meeting minutes." Karen's expression hardened. "You have 30 days to pay these fines in full and remedy all violations before the lien process begins. I suggest you consider the long-term consequences of your stubbornness." She turned and walked away, her threat hanging in the air between us. That night I could not sleep. The financial pressure was mounting, but something about Karen's specific mention of approved contractors kept nagging at me. I decided to look more closely at the community pool and clubhouse that sat downhill from my property. The next morning, I stopped by the county records office and requested all permits and inspection reports related to the Oakwood Heights community pool. The clerk returned with a surprisingly thin folder. "Is this everything?" I asked, flipping through the sparse documents. "That is all we have on file," she confirmed, though it does seem unusually limited for a commercial pool installation. Back home, I studied what little information I had. The pool had been built 12 years ago by Bluecrest Pool and Landscape Co. The permits appeared to be in order, though several required inspection forms were missing from the public record. Most concerning was the absence of any watershed management plan or drainage study, despite the pool being at one of the lowest elevation points in the neighborhood. I needed expert eyes on this information. Through an online search, I found Marcus Rivera, a civil engineer specializing in watershed management and construction. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop the following afternoon. "These plans are concerning," Marcus said, spreading the documents across the cafe table. "The pool appears to have been built with minimal accommodation for the natural water flow patterns of the area. Given its location at the bottom of a gentle slope, I would expect much more extensive drainage infrastructure." He pointed to several areas of the blueprint where standard water management features were conspicuously absent. "And you say your property is directly uphill from this pool?" Marcus asked, glancing up at me. I nodded, showing him a topographical map of the neighborhood I had printed. My property sat on the gentle slope, approximately 200 feet uphill from the community pool and clubhouse. "With your drainage system removed, where would the water naturally flow during a heavy rain?" I asked. Marcus traced a path with his finger. "Physics is consistent. Water follows the path of least resistance downhill. Without a proper drainage system on your property during a significant rain event, water would flow directly toward this pool area. He studied the pool construction documents more carefully. There are several areas where corners appear to have been cut. The filtration system is undersized for a pool of this volume. The concrete surround lacks proper expansion joints. And most concerning, there appears to be no secondary drainage system in case of overflow or heavy rain. I sat back, trying to process this information. So if my drainage system is removed and we get a heavy rain, the water from your property and those around you would flow downhill toward the pool, Marcus confirmed. If the pool's infrastructure is as compromised as these documents suggest, contamination would be almost inevitable. The implications were staggering. Karen's crusade to remove my drainage system could potentially endanger the very community centerpiece her husband's company had built. When I returned home that evening, a notice of a special HOA meeting had been slipped under my door. The topic: emergency drainage modifications and community safety measures. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, leaving me little time to prepare. I looked out my window at the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, both literally and figuratively. The community pool gleamed in the distance, blissfully unaware of the potential disaster that Karen Woodley's vendetta might bring upon it. The community center hummed with unusual energy the night of the special meeting. Word had spread that something significant was happening, and attendance was nearly triple that of a normal HOA meeting. I arrived early and took a seat near the back, my folder of documentation clutched tightly in my hands. Karen Woodley stood at the podium looking particularly satisfied, a PowerPoint presentation queued up behind her. The other board members sat at their usual table, eyes downcast, already aware of what was about to transpire. "Thank you all for coming to this special session," Karen began once the room had quieted. "The board has identified a serious safety and aesthetic concern that requires immediate action." The presentation screen switched to a close-up photo of my drainage system, angled to make it appear as intrusive and ugly as possible. This unauthorized drainage modification at 1542 Oakwood Drive represents both a violation of our community standards and a potential safety hazard, Karen continued. Despite multiple notices, the homeowner has refused to remedy the situation. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, some curious, some sympathetic, most simply uncomfortable at being caught in someone else's conflict. "Therefore," Karen announced with barely concealed triumph, "the board is invoking Section 12.4 of our bylaws, which allows for direct intervention in cases of persistent violations that may impact community safety or property values." She clicked to the next slide, which outlined a resolution authorizing the HOA to hire contractors to forcibly remove my drainage system and bill me for the costs in addition to the accumulated fines. When the floor opened for discussion, I immediately stood and approached the microphone. "I would like to present evidence that my drainage system was properly permitted and approved by both the county and the previous HOA board." I held up my documentation and began to speak about the selective enforcement I had documented throughout the neighborhood. Suddenly, the microphone cut out. I tapped it, but no sound emerged. "Technical difficulties," Karen announced smoothly. "We need to move forward with the vote. Any other comments from the floor?" A few homeowners raised their hands, but Karen recognized only those she knew would not challenge her. When it came time to vote, the board members dutifully raised their hands in unanimous support of the resolution. Despite protests from several homeowners about the silenced microphone, Karen declared the measure passed and quickly adjourned the meeting. I tried to speak with other homeowners afterward, but most avoided eye contact and hurried to their cars. Frank Delgado gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder as he passed. "They got the Patels the same way," he murmured before disappearing into the night. 3 days later, a truck bearing the Bluecrest Pool and Landscape logo pulled into my driveway unannounced. 4 workers in company uniforms began unloading equipment before I could even get to the door. The foreman, a burly man with a clipboard, barely glanced at me as I came outside. HOA hired us to remove an unauthorized drainage stem, he stated flatly. "We have all the required paperwork." I asked to see the documentation, which he reluctantly showed me. Everything appeared to be in order. The HOA had legal authority to take this action under their bylaws, provided they had followed proper procedures, which they claimed to have done. "I would like to record this for my own documentation," I said, pulling out my phone. "Whatever," the foreman shrugged. "We are just doing the job we were paid for." For the next 4 hours, I watched as they systematically dismantled the drainage system that had protected my property and those downhill from it. They filled in the channels, removed the collection points, and effectively returned my property to its unmanaged drainage state. When they finished, the foreman approached with a clipboard. "Need you to sign this acknowledging the work has been completed per HOA instructions." I studied the document carefully. It was a standard completion form with no hidden clauses or admissions of wrongdoing on my part. I signed it, my signature revealing none of the calculation happening behind my neutral expression. What the foreman did not notice was the phone in my pocket, which had been recording our entire conversation, including his casual admission that they were just following orders, and several comments from workers about how this seems like overkill for a drainage system that was not hurting anyone. After they left, I sat in my living room, staring out at the now vulnerable slope of my front yard. I had appeared to accept defeat, signing their paperwork without argument. Karen would believe she had won. That evening, I met with Dr. Elaine Hammond, a hydrologist and water management expert recommended by Marcus. In her cluttered university office, surrounded by watershed models and topographical maps, she reviewed all the documentation I had gathered. "This is profoundly concerning," Dr. Hammond said, pointing to the water flow simulations she had run based on the topography of my neighborhood. "By removing your drainage system without replacement, they have created a direct water channel that will activate during the next significant rain event." She rotated a 3D model on her computer screen. "Water from your property and those adjacent will now flow unimpeded downhill, directly toward the community pool area. Given what you have told me about the pool's construction shortcuts, contamination is not just possible but probable." "How probable?" I asked quietly. "With a rain event of 1 inch or more over a short period." "Nearly certain," she replied. "The water will carry soil, landscaping chemicals, possibly even sewage backup if the ground becomes saturated enough. The pool's inadequate filtration system would be overwhelmed almost immediately." I nodded slowly, the first hint of a plan forming in my mind. And if someone were to document this occurring and had previously warned the HOA of this exact scenario? Dr. Hammond raised an eyebrow. They would have evidence of negligence and willful disregard for expert advice. From a liability perspective, that would be quite damaging. I thanked her for her time and expertise, asking for her assessment in writing. As I left her office, I checked the weather forecast on my phone. A major storm system was predicted to hit our area in approximately 10 days. Perfect timing. The morning after Bluecrest removed my drainage system, I emerged from my house with shoulders slumped and head down, the very picture of defeat. Any watching eyes, and I suspected there were several, would see exactly what Karen wanted to see: another homeowner broken by her authority. Inside, however, I was moving with purpose and precision. First, I set up weather alerts on my phone for any storm system that might bring an inch or more of rainfall. The Meteorological Service predicted a significant weather front moving toward our area in the coming week. Next, I purchased 6 small weatherproof cameras with night vision capability. Under cover of darkness, I installed them at strategic points along my property line and aimed them to capture the water flow patterns that would develop during heavy rainfall. The cameras were well hidden in shrubs and trees, invisible to casual observation. That same week, I visited the county building inspection office. The clerk at the front desk recognized me from my previous visit researching the pool permits. "Back again?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Yes," I replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "I would like to formally report potential safety concerns regarding the Oakwood Heights community pool." The folder contained copies of the engineering assessments from both Marcus and Dr. Hammond, along with documentation of the drainage system removal and the potential consequences. The clerk flipped through the papers, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "This is quite detailed," she remarked. I'll make sure it gets to the right inspector. I would appreciate a receipt confirming you received this documentation," I added, "for my records." She nodded and provided an official stamped acknowledgement of my submission, one more piece of evidence for my growing paper trail. The next day, I sent certified letters to the HOA board, the property management company, and Karen Woodley personally. Each letter contained the same information I had provided to the county: expert assessments of the drainage situation, predictions of what would happen in a heavy rain event, and a formal warning that the removal of my drainage system had created a hazardous condition that threatened the community pool. I kept the receipts for all certified mailings, adding them to my documentation file. No one could claim later that they had not been warned. Meanwhile, preparation for the summer pool season was in full swing at the community clubhouse. From my living room window, I could see maintenance crews cleaning the pool deck, arranging furniture, and preparing for what Karen had been advertising as the grand reopening celebration, following some cosmetic upgrades over the winter. Glossy flyers appeared in everyone's mailbox, announcing the pool party scheduled for the following Saturday. Karen's smiling face dominated the corner of the flyer beneath text proclaiming, "Another successful year of maintaining our community's beauty and value." The irony was almost painful. On Thursday evening, the local news began reporting on a significant storm system moving into our area. The meteorologist pointed to swirling cloud patterns on the weather map, predicting 1 to 3 inches of rainfall beginning Saturday afternoon and continuing into the evening, exactly when the pool party was scheduled to begin. I spent Friday checking and rechecking my camera setups, ensuring they were weatherproof and positioned to capture what was about to unfold. I also prepared a waterproof jacket, boots, and additional recording equipment for myself. I wanted to document the events from multiple angles, leaving no room for denial later. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, giving no hint of the afternoon's forecast. From my window, I watched as Bluecrest employees set up tents, tables, and decorations around the pool area. Karen supervised personally, occasionally glancing up toward my house with what appeared to be smug satisfaction. By early afternoon, dark clouds began gathering on the western horizon. Pool party attendees started arriving in summer attire, clearly hoping to enjoy a few hours of celebration before the rain arrived. Music drifted up the hill from the increasingly crowded pool deck. I checked the weather radar on my phone. The storm was intensifying and moving directly toward us, faster than originally predicted. The first raindrops would hit within the hour. At precisely 3:45 p.m., the first heavy drops began falling. I stood at my window, watching as party guests glanced nervously at the darkening sky. Karen seemed to be reassuring them, pointing to the large tents that had been set up around the pool deck. Then the skies opened. Rain pounded down in sheets, quickly overwhelming the land's natural absorption capacity. I stepped outside onto my covered porch, protected from the downpour but able to witness what was happening on my property. Just as Dr. Hammond had predicted, water began collecting and flowing downhill, following the exact path where my drainage system had once been. What had previously been a controlled channel was now becoming a determined river, gathering speed and volume as it carved its way toward the community pool below. Through my binoculars, I could see the growing concern on the faces of party guests as they noticed the increasing water flow approaching the pool area. Karen stood at the edge of the pool deck, her expression transitioning from annoyance to alarm as muddy water began washing across the pristine concrete surround. I returned inside and checked the feeds from my hidden cameras. Each captured the water's inexorable journey from different angles, providing irrefutable evidence of exactly what the experts had predicted. The storm was only beginning, but already the consequences of Karen's vendetta were becoming apparent to everyone at the pool party. I stood at my window once more, rain lashing against the glass, watching as nature delivered the message that human voices had failed to convey. The water knew only one truth: it always finds the path of least resistance downhill. And that path now led directly to Karen, Woodley's precious community pool. The storm intensified into a deluge of biblical proportions. Rain hammered down in solid sheets, creating a constant roar against my roof and windows. Through my hidden cameras and occasional glimpses through binoculars, I watched the unfolding disaster with a strange mixture of vindication and concern. The water flow from M.Y. property had become a muddy torrent, carrying soil, mulch, and landscape debris downhill precisely as predicted. The carefully maintained strip of land between my property and the pool area, once a gentle slope of manicured grass, had transformed into a muddy river delta. On my computer screen, the camera feeds showed the water reaching the pool deck, first as small rivulets, then as a growing flood that overwhelmed the inadequate drainage around the pool's perimeter. Party guests huddled under the tents, watching in horror as nature reclaimed the space. The pool itself, initially a bright turquoise blue, began to cloud as the first waves of muddy water splashed over its edges. The filtration system, undersized and poorly designed according to Marcus's assessment, quickly became overwhelmed. Within 20 minutes, the pool water had turned a murky brown. But the situation was about to become much worse. The sustained heavy rainfall saturated the ground throughout the neighborhood, causing water tables to rise rapidly. As Dr. Hammond had warned might happen in a severe storm, sewage systems began backing up in the lowest areas of the development, exactly where the pool was located. Through my binoculars, I could see the horrified reactions as party guests noticed the pool water darkening from brown to an ominous black. The distinctive odor of sewage backup had apparently become noticeable, as people began covering their noses and moving rapidly away from the pool area. Karen stood at the edge of the deck, her elegant outfit soaked through, screaming instructions at Bluecrest employees who frantically attempted to divert the water flow with sandbags and makeshift barriers. Their efforts were futile against the forces of nature and gravity. The pool filtration system made a final mechanical groan audible even from my vantage point, then failed completely. Black water began overflowing the pool's edges, spreading across the deck and into the clubhouse through its inadequately sealed doors. Just as the situation reached its chaotic peak, county vehicles with flashing lights pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. 3 inspectors in bright yellow raincoats emerged, clipboards covered in plastic.